that was very, very different from my picks and their picks is that, and it's all about playing it safe. I focused on guys like Jeremy Hill, who I picked as my number 20 running back overall. No one else had him in the top 20. They all looked at Gio Bernard as invincible, as a number 1, maybe a high-end number 2 running back. But Jeremy Hill was green and wasn't going to get the carries. When Gio Bernard, by the way, got hurt around week 11, I went on my blog and I told everyone, trade for Jeremy Hill right now. Anyone who has Jeremy Hill in your league, grab him. And Hill ended up, I think he has the most yards in the regular season from week 13 on. So there's something to say for being able to spot those guys that no one else is spotting. And then, I also was very, very down on the Cardinals defense and the 49ers defense. Everyone had those two in the top 6, pretty much. I didn't believe in them. I thought they were overrated. It was more about their legacy as great defenses rather than what they could actually offer. Niners squeaked into the top 10. The Cardinals did not get in, and so that was a big difference there. And then on the receiving end, I had Torrey Smith, and not a lot of people thought Torrey Smith was going to take that next step, especially with Steve Smith on the team. And so I feel like having a guy like Torrey Smith in my top 20 became a differentiator, and anyone who drafted Torrey Smith as a top 20 guy got that differentiation. The same thing with Deshaun Jackson. I was the only person to take Deshaun Jackson in my top 20 and not have Pierre Garçon. Pierre Garçon, I didn't think would be in the top 30. I wrote about it on my blog. I got a lot of flack for it, and it turned out to come true. Deshaun Jackson snug in the top 20. Garçon, I think, wasn't even in the top 50. And finally, one of my favorite picks was Travis Kelce, who I picked as the 10th best tight end. Vernon Davis was nowhere in my top 10. That was the opposite of all the other experts. They all had Vernon Davis. Everyone was a little bit overwhelmed by the fact that he had so many touchdowns last year. I think it was last year, 11 or whatever touchdowns. And what people have to understand is just because you get touchdowns doesn't mean that you're going to get as many targets this year, and doesn't mean that those targets are going to be in the red zone. The Niners have a more dysfunctional offense heading into this season than a lot of people expected. And I went with a guy like Kelce because I thought Alex Smith, as a conservative play caller, would go more into the low, the high probability, low yield kind of passing options, and wouldn't be throwing long. And that meant Dwayne Bowe, Donnie Avery were not going to be big beneficiaries. Instead, Travis Kelce would be the main guy. And that's how it turned out. So all that to say, I did get a bunch wrong. I thought Zach Stacy would be much better. I was obviously high, like a lot of people were, on Adrian Peterson. I thought Ryan Matthews and Reggie Bush would sneak into the top 20. They didn't. I was a big fan of Vincent Jackson, which fell short. I also picked T.Y. Hilton. None of the other 3 sites picked T.Y. Hilton in the top 20. It sounds kind of ridiculous now, but it's odd that T.Y. Hilton, one of those guys, if anyone took him in the 4th round by following my advice, they got a steal. So
absolutely,
it doesn't always work out, but on balance, the key is always it's about the percentages. And if you can do 2, 3, 4% better than everyone else in your league in making picks, that's going to be enough to go 9-4 and have a great shot at the title.
Absolutely, and looking at those percentages, before we look, you make your bold predictions too. We'll dive into those. But again, as you said, in your listings, now this is top 10 or top 20 at each position? Top 10, right, at each position?
Top 10 at each position, but running back and receiver are top 20 because
top 20 for those
there's so much depth. Everyone's got 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 at each of those positions.
Yeah, so deep. So when you look at those listings of positions, and of course it's up on the blog that we mention all the time, Fantasy Football for Winners on Facebook, but your percentage was nearly 60%, 58%. CBS Sports was 51%, as my phone closes on me here. Yahoo, 49%, and ESPN, 48%. So you nailed a full 10% of your top grouping of players better than anybody who was simply going off the best player listed on ESPN and their predictions and all of that stuff, which, as you said, you're talking about just a couple of percentage points, and that's a whole 10% difference there in success rate, And as I tell people, you're very transparent as far as what you got, which you have to be. When you do what we do, when you make predictions or give opinions publicly, you can't, people do run away from it. They just pretend they didn't say it when it was wrong. Some people just ignore it, but I don't have that luxury. You could just go pull up yesterday's show on the internet and go, hey, J-Rock, listen to yourself. Here's what you said. So we have to, if you're good at what you do, and if you've got pride in yourself, then you stick behind it, and you're always really good at coming back and going, man, I got that one wrong. And I do that same thing. Hey, man, I got that one wrong, man. So, but still, a good percentage higher than everybody else, man. And congratulations on that. Now let's look at your bold, and there's a reason that they're called bold predictions, because you're going out on a limb. You do it every season. You lay out 10 of them, and we did this at the beginning of the year. So would you like to start going through them? I know number one, Matty Ice, and I took Matt Ryan in one of my leagues in my drafts, but you had him predicted as a top 3 fantasy quarterback. How did he finish out?
That's right. He finished 7th, and this is all standard scoring leagues, your typical, 6 points for a touchdown and all that. By standing by my predictions, it's all about knowing why you made the prediction and why it didn't work out. And in any given season, you look at Adrian Peterson this year, no one could have predicted that Adrian Peterson wouldn't be a top, 50 running back because he gets suspended. You can't predict that stuff. But you can kind of understand, okay, if this happens and this happens and this happens, this guy might not do as well, and that's the probability you're basing it on. With Matt Ryan, it turns out it was about the offensive line. Julio Jones, there were question marks about Jones's health coming into the season. There were question marks about Roddy White's health coming into the season. And there are question marks about an inexperienced tight end La'Lon Tuolo, who really wasn't much of a pass catcher. Who did they have if Jones or White went down? As it turned out, they lost, I think, 3 of their linemen in the first few weeks of the season. And Matt Ryan, who started out great, he was a top 3 quarterback the first 2-3 weeks, suddenly became a shell of himself because there was no pass protection. So he finished 7th because he finished strong. The team was able to adjust. But the fact is, I'm still high on Matt Ryan next year. And I think it's a case where personnel, you can't help it, but I still stand by him as an elite quarterback going into next season.
Now, I'll tell you what, you basically, looking at your top 10 here, you went 50-50, which when you're making bold predictions, to me, is a good percentage because you're going out on a limb and you're nailing half of them, But
that's right.
To follow him up, another guy there, and this is one where I would say, kind of like what you said, looking into next season, end of the season when he got some play a little bit, Devontae Freeman showed a little something there. You and I both. I picked him up in one of my leagues early. He helped me in the last week or two. He saved me when I was in a conundrum in the playoffs in the running back position because he was able to have a couple of just okay performances that worked out for me, but he filled a gap. But I think we both thought he was going to get more opportunity than he did, and he was never really able to get a good number of reps as a young guy. But I think he showed enough at the end of the season. I would be interested in Devontae Freeman next year and seeing what he can do.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, 470-something, all-purpose yards. He scored a couple times, including in Week 16.
Right.
And he had, he showed glimpses of what people think he can do. He ran for a little under 3.8 yards per carry. But Steven Jackson, you give Steven Jackson credit. They managed his carries. He stayed healthy. And that's how Devontae Freeman was kept on the sidelines for most of the year. But when you look at when Freeman got into the games, especially in the middle of the season, he was running, 4, 5, 6 yards a carry. Early in the season, he looked a little, it was a little green. So I think this is a guy who's definitely on his way up. I agree with you on that. And, the logic was there. The logic was Steven Jackson won't stay healthy. Jackson does stay healthy. The pick didn't work out.
Yeah. And that's just like I said, when you go out on a limb, Jordan Reed's one that you said, and again, this is one a lot of people were high on, though. You had him at perhaps being a top 4 tight end, and he was trending in a good way early, but he got banged up, and as we know, things went the way they did in Washington in general, offensively, and that did not work out well at all. Same with Michael Floyd, not terrible, but you had him in the top 12. He finished 34th, and Zuerlein, look, when you're off offense isn't making anything happen, then your kicker is not making anything happen either, But on the back end, on the backside, you had some that you nailed, including my man Jordan Matthews, and I was with you on him all season long.
Right.
Yeah, I had him, and I suffered all season long. He was one of the ones that salvaged the second half of my season, though, because once Philadelphia got that young man going, he had some good performances in the second half of the season.
That's right. Once Foles went out and Sanchez came in, those two had great chemistry in the preseason, and you saw that in back-to-back 100-yard games that he had that helped a lot of people out in November when he went on a tear. He had like 4 or 5 touchdowns in 4 or 5 games.
He helped me.
Slowed down a little bit later in the year, but then caught fire in the final week for people in daily leagues and, playing in Week 17 championship. So Jordan Matthews, he is far and above better than Riley Cooper, and I think he could give Macklin a run for his money next season. This is a guy who could easily top 1,000 yards and still get 8+ touchdowns, which would make him, a top 20 receiver at least next season. Obviously, there are question marks about who's going to be quarterbacking, so people need to watch that. But Matthews definitely showed people that he's for real, and he snuck in as the 24th best receiver. I picked him as a top 25, so that worked out.
And then
Pierre Garçon, another receiver. On the flip side, I said that he wouldn't be a top 25. And the reasoning was, and people can go back on my site and go through all my picks in August, I lay out why people will do what they will do or won't do what they won't do. And with Garçon, he led the league in targets last year, but that was with Jordan Reed hurt. I thought Reed would be healthy, but Niles Paul stepped up in Reed's absence, so you had that threat from Garçon. And you had Deshaun Jackson, who became the main downfield threat.
Yep.
And you had a quarterback situation that wasn't as good as people thought it should have been at this stage. And all that added up to Pierre Garçon becoming almost invisible by the second half of the season. I was telling people to skip Garçon. Don't even pick him in the 3rd, 4th, or even 5th round. Don't get caught up in the idea that a guy like Garçon can duplicate what he did last year, because if the targets aren't there, the touchdowns and the yards are not going to be there. And people who bought into that save themselves a lot of trouble. Imagine taking T.Y. Hilton instead of Pierre Garçon. All the experts picked Garçon better than Hilton. I picked Hilton much better than Garçon. It was apples and oranges if you went the other way.
Oh, I'm sitting here. I've got the notepad out from the day that we were doing the predictions, and I've got I like little small notes, and I've got a big Garçon dash capital N, capital O is all I have next to him here when I was just making my real time, just hurry up and scramble it notes. It just says Garçon, no. But anyways, that's funny. I went and flipped back to that page.
This is you're a full service radio host. This is very impressive. I mean,
look, I do this every day, and I get hit in the head for a living when I'm not doing this as well. I need to be able to go, hey, what the heck were we talking about? 6 mastic notes. Don't get me wrong. But on my format sheet every day, I'll just, as I'm going, I'll kind of just make it. It's not anything intentional, but thank you for note. But no, it wasn't for that. It just happened that when we're real time, you and I doing the fantasy football thing, I don't got time to I have to remember the things you tell me, but I'm hosting, so I'll make specific notes for you so that I can go fix my lineup later. It's not fair. I'm telling you, everybody gets a head start on me. That's why I started just doing it live on the air. I'm like, you know what? I don't care. I'm just going to start changing it live on the air. But anyways, a couple others that you nailed in your bold predictions, a couple of defenses. You nailed it with the Texans. You said top 5. They finished 4th in defenses, and you just missed nailing it with the 49ers. You said they will not be a top 10 fantasy defense. They finished right at the outskirts of that at the 10th ranking. And then go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, with the Niners, they snuck in the final week.
Yes.
That win over the Cardinals. And I had the Cardinals and Niners both out of my top 10. So, it was one of those cases where one of them was probably going to sneak back in. But, the key there, the Texans, almost no one had them in the top 7, top 8. A lot didn't have them in the top 10. The reason that I picked them in the top 5 is because last year Matt Schaub threw 4 pick sixes, which accounted for a good chunk of points that they lost. That's about 15 points off the table they didn't get just because they had a bad quarterback. This year they had a different situation. Granted, Ryan Fitzpatrick wasn't the ideal quarterback, but he's a world better than Matt Schaub. And they had a healthy Arian Foster. And I felt going into the season, if you